Hello, everybody. Welcome to RDA Tech Q&A. You've got questions. We've got guesses. It's a Black Friday miracle because we're here the day after Black Friday to answer potentially your tech questions about products you just picked up, products you're going to pick up this holiday season. Just all of your shopping stuff for technology. We're going to tell you about it. I'm Nash.
Yeah.
I've been doing RDA for many, many years. And in addition to that, I've also worked in the tech industry. With me, as always, my producer, Mike Gearman, has a similar long and storied history of playing with technology. Now, normally we do all news stories for the first part of our show, but I wanted to start off here since we are on the eve of the 4K consoles and other stuff. I wanted to take a moment to... We do have a news story that is affecting your holiday buying. We'll get to that in a minute. And yeah, net neutrality, still a thing. We'll report when there's anything to update, but Hedget Pie, still a dick. But first off, I wanted to talk a little bit about 4K and you. Mainly because I'm not talking down to anybody here. I'm not insinuating you're stupid, because the marketing on this has been abysmal.
Yeah, it has. Now, hold on. We're not necessarily insinuating you're being stupid, unless you send us a really dumb question. But that hasn't happened lately.
Yeah. What we're talking about is with 4K, with the move to 4K televisions and everything, I have noticed that people don't quite grasp one of the main concepts of 4K, which is that people have been going out. I've seen talk on forums and stuff about they want to upgrade to 4K, so they want to get an Xbox One X, which means people aren't quite grasping. So let's break things down for you very simply. First off, no matter what device you get, Xbox One X, PS Pro, even the Xbox One S, or any other, or even the new Apple TV that's going to be coming out, or a Chromecast Ultra, just because a device is 4K capable, that has no impact. Well, it's not going to turn your 1080p high definition screen into 4K. It's two separate things.
Think of it basically as a pipe. And
right,
each end of the pipe has a certain size. So you've got 4K on one end of the pipe, but if you've only got 1080p on the other end of the pipe, it ain't coming out 4K.
Yeah. The 4K part of it has nothing to do with the peripherals. It's all based on the television set. Just like with your old CRT televisions compared to VGA to SVGA, it does, and up to now it's at 1080p and high definition. It's not a matter of anything but the screen itself. When we use these numbers like 1080, 720, 4K, what we're talking about is the number of pixels that the screen can produce
in a given whatever.
Right.
So sometimes when you see a 720 and it's smaller than a 1080, which might be huge, you might get actually better resolution on the 720 because it's not spreading those things out effectively over such a large area.
Right. It
might look better. Of course, they'll both look good at a distance.
But at its base level, the monitor itself, the screen itself, is where the 4K happens. That it has a certain number of pixels across and down, and that it's not actually 4K. It's like 3,000 something, but they rounded up to 4K because it sounds better for marketing.
Well, yeah, it's easier for the people selling it to say,
right,
4K rolls off the tongue, 3.851K. Now, people would go, no.
So your first step in, if this is the year you want to upgrade, not judging, your first step is the TV has to be upgraded first. It doesn't matter if you get the Xbox One X or the PS Pro. It's still
it will auto detect what the TV is and go, okay, I'm downsampling.
right. The TV is still going to be in 1080. You're not going to have 4K. You have to have a 4K television first. Now, here's the next part. HDMI and 4K. This is one of those things we've kind of taken for granted. We've been using HDMI about 5 years now.
I'd say at least, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of been the standard. We've taken HDMI for granted. We've sort of thought that HDMI was the USB of connecting your monitor. You just plug it in and you're done, and it all works. 4K.
Well, to be fair, you can say that about most video inputs. It's just that sometimes you've got multiple plugs. You got to go, okay, which there's the color code goes where.
4K kind of throws a wrinkle into this, and it's an even bigger wrinkle considering, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, the HDMI cables have not changed.
Not really. I mean, you can get variations on the cables, some that say they're better, some that say this, because I want to say there's some HDMI cables that have extra capability built into them, but your standard HDMI cable is the same plug, same interface.
Right. So it didn't change from HDMI 1.4 to HDMI 2.2.
I don't believe so. No.
Right. So that's our first problem. The cable is exactly the same, but HDMI has changed. You might notice when you're out shopping for electronics this year that some boxes will boast HDMI 2.0, or is 2.2 out yet?
That's what I'm checking right now. 2.1, no, 2.1 just came out January of this year.
Okay.
So I would not expect 2.2 to be anytime soon.
Oh, HDMI 2.1 kind of has a different cable. The connector is the same. Yeah. All of the connections for HDMI have not changed. But what's behind those connectors inside your devices has changed. For years, we just sort of took HDMI for granted. It was a thing we all use. And then 4K happened. 4K, the old style of HDMI cannot, 1.4 and under, I believe. I think 1.4 was the first one to do 2K. Am I correct?
2K resolution. I'm checking. I think so.
Yeah. Older HDMI could not handle the data rate that 4K demands. 4K is actually data. It's like your Ethernet cable or whatnot. It's a digital data transmission. And the older standard of HDMI just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. That's why you'll look on some boxes, it will say HDMI 1.4 or HDMI 2.0 or now HDMI 2.1. HDMI had to get upgraded to handle 4K. So even though the same cables will plug into all your devices, here's where things start getting a little wonky. When you upgrade your TV to 4K, you might
have to upgrade everything.
You might have to upgrade, especially, and this is if you have a home theater setup and you have an AV receiver for like your 7.1 or your 5.1 or whatever you have. A little problem there. If you have an old one that's worked great for years, you're like, why would I upgrade this? Well, and it sounds stupid that your audio receiver would interfere with your video, but if your AV receiver is still one of the older HDMIs under HDMI 1.4, and you try to plug in, and if you have a receiver like mine has a whole bunch of HDMI slots on the back to pass through the stuff to the television. I have my HDMI receiver, and then my Xbox goes into one of those, and I have an extra HDMI cable to plug in my computer if I ever want to use it for my big screen and whatnot. That is part of the video setup. So, if you have an HDMI 1.4 receiver and a 4K television, and you try to plug in your brand new Xbox One X or even an Xbox One S and expect to get 4K video, it won't work because the receiver doesn't have the bandwidth. The older HDMI standard in your audio receiver doesn't have the bandwidth to pass along the 4K signal.
Now you could plug it in directly.
Right, but you'd miss out on using your 5.1 surround sound. So, if you're upgrading your television to 4K, you're also going to have to upgrade your AV receiver to 4K. And that's another big chunk of change on top of it. Something to keep in mind.
And that's before we get into 5K and 8K somewhere down the line.
That's good. Yeah, that's something to remember. Your HDMI receiver, your AV receiver is going to have to be upgraded for that too, because this is all
in theory, because the 2.1 spec does include 4K and 8K, but here's the thing: the people who make the AV components may only make it work for the earlier versions of 2.1. Say, oh yeah, this only works up to 4K. You got to pay for a new one 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if you want that, or you can pay a whole bunch of extra money to have that capability now that you cannot use.
Also a little bit of a tip, Blu-ray. This also applies to Blu-ray players as well. For 4K Blu-ray player, I would like to mention, if you don't have one by now, and this is not me shilling for Microsoft here, but I just have to say, price-wise,
They're pretty cheap right now.
You'd be a whole lot better to pick up an Xbox One S. They're on sale at the moment. I think the cheapest bundle, if you don't give a crap about games, but just want a really good TV box with Blu-ray, 4K, the Xbox One S is your best bet. It's, I believe they're at $190. Even comes with a free game, even if you don't want a game.
And doubles as a space heater.
Mine actually is pretty decent. It's not that it's not that.
Oh, they fixed the heating problems then finally.
The original Blu-ray Xbox One, yeah, the Xbox One does have Blu-ray. If I'm not mistaken, the original.
I don't think it had 4K Blu-ray though.
No, it doesn't. That's why I'm saying. The old Xbox One has Blu-ray, but it doesn't have 4K Blu-ray. The Xbox One S and the Xbox One X both have Blu-ray players, and they both have 4K Blu-ray. In addition to that, they can do 4K, any 4K video. So it does Netflix, it does Amazon, Hulu, HBO Go. It's got a ton of different apps. If you're looking to upgrade your system, if you're going to 4K this year, the Xbox One S, game or not, even if you don't game, you pick that up. Also, something you can pick up with it is Talon makes a company called Talon makes a really good remote control for the Xbox. That will not just control the Xbox, it'll also control your TV and your AV receiver all at once through the Xbox.
So you've just got one thing to lose in the couch rather than three.
Yes, just one thing. So that's a pretty good, decent, if price-wise, that's a good bet if you're making the 4K jump. If you're not a gamer, you don't need the Xbox One X. I mean, but if you want just a decent system, recommendations of Blu-ray drives for existing PC TV boxes. Honestly, any of those is going to do you just fine, especially if it's not a burner. Blu-ray has gotten down to the point, right, price-wise in PCs has gotten down to the point right now you can just plug any old one into it. And check the Newegg reviews. This is the best thing
the only
to tell
problem you might have is getting Windows, and I think they fixed this in a patch, but I'm not sure. Getting Windows to recognize it. But that's it. It's a registry change. I made it myself.
I think they may have.
It came back.
They may have fixed that.
It took them a year.
Yeah.
And if for whatever reason you go, oh, I hooked up this Blu-ray to my computer, and it won't recognize it, guess what? We're here to help.
Yeah. So you can send us questions. You can send those questions to requests@radio.air.com. Other things to think. So 4K. Now the other question people ask, do I really need 4K? And the answer is not yet, because another consideration to take into account is, even if you want to watch stuff like Netflix and Amazon and whatnot in 4K, well, you can, but you better hope you don't have a data cap, because all of the 4K streaming a 1080p video already takes a certain amount of data. A 4K video takes, what is it, twice or 4 times as much data?
I'm not sure, but it takes a lot more.
It takes a lot more. So you're going to be eating into your data cap that much faster if you want to use your new TV for 4K streaming. That's something you want to keep in mind if you're going to make the jump. 4 times as much. Yeah. That can be the difference between 1 gig and 4 gigs.
And it can be the difference of, I've made it partway through this series I was binge watching and all the way through the series you were binge watching.
Yeah. And a lot of people pointed out when we were first talking about this, visually 4K is very difficult to distinguish the difference. Now, there are some aspects of 4K televisions that I don't know if 1080p have adopted these. I don't think so, because they're kind of phasing those out. There's something called high definition resolution, HDR. It has to do with the color grading, with the amount of colors the screen can display, and it enhances the video, apparently. That's the way people put it. It makes the video look more vibrant, or it makes the video look more accurate, and people have been raving about this quite a bit. Unfortunately, I think high dynamic range, that's it. Thank you. Unfortunately, I think the problem with HDR is it's kind of wedded to 4K. So you can't get one without the other. Is HDR, if you're a real big cinephile, I could see HDR being a selling point for 4K. And prices are coming down, and it is relatively, feasible. But just understand, you have to do a lot of upgrading and figuring.
Yeah, but going back to, is it worth it? The best way is to ask yourself, how far away do you sit away from your TV? If you sit 10 feet away from your TV, which I think is the recommended distance from all your eye doctors in the world, minimum distance, so you don't get eye strain, then it doesn't make a difference unless your screen is like 60 inches or better.
See, my screen is like 56 inches, and we sit about 6 feet away from it.
So yeah, you'll see a difference.
Nah, we have a whole lot of other important shit to do. We've got repairs to make on the house.
Yeah, you're not watching as much TV as you might be at, say, 6 months from now.
Yeah. Also, not a lot of channels are available in 4K yet. Some.
So just because they say, hey, 4K TV, it's a great thing, and your cable company may pimp it out and say, oh yeah, our new cable box is 4K capable, doesn't mean that they're actually giving you 4K signal. It just means they're trying to get you on the new cable box ahead of time. So then when and if they do a full 4K switchover, they're not handling 10,000 calls of people screaming, why doesn't my cable box work anymore? They're only handling 5,000 calls of people screaming that.
Now, the problem is, the big problem here is most new televisions right now are 4K by default. Even though there's not a whole lot of 4K content, then it's just going to upscale 10. Yeah.
And the reason for this is it's just simpler for their production lines to make them.
So if you are getting a new television, now that's not to say your old AV receiver won't work with 4K TV.
It'll work fine. It just won't pass along 4K.
Right. So you'll be stuck at 1080p, which will be fine for the foreseeable future because there's just not a lot of 4K content yet. Keep all that stuff in mind. It's
even that Xbox that says, oh yeah, 4K capable, doesn't mean the games are being produced at 4K.
No.
Because that takes up a lot of space on game disks, and takes a lot of time for renders to happen.
Yeah, even the special editions that the Xbox One X have released, number one, you have to download a whole lot more textures and stuff. And even like...
look, there goes your data cap.
Yeah. They have an old version of Skyrim, I believe, that they're releasing, and a Fallout version that's Fallout 4 that's in 4K. It's still the same number of polygons and whatnot. It's still the same wireframe size. They're just increasing the resolution of the textures on everything.
Yes.
It's not a whole lot of...
And though, by the way, remember, for gamers, those are things you're turning down anyway, because they interfere with your response rate, so you can shoot things faster.
Well, what about you guys? Well, now that we've covered 4K, you guys are going, well, I don't care about that, see, because I'm a PC gamer. And you know what? I'm going to take advantage of some of these great deals this holiday season, and I'm going to build a brand new Intel gaming PC. Oh, boy!
You can do that.
You can do that. However, and I love that this came out the day before Black Friday. Oopsie fucking doodle.
Ah, yes.
Intel announced that their 6th and 7th and presumably 8th generation processors, the brand new ones and the ones for back 1 year back and 2 years back to, let's say, around 2015. All of these processors have a great big fucking security hole in them.
Now, the good news about... Sorry, I got a second. Sorry.
Oh.
The good news about the security hole is that no one seemed to have exploited it yet. Yet. So you've got time to patch.
However, and while I want to note that HP, Dell, and other straight-up vendors, so if you're buying a computer off the rack, HP and Dell and other vendors, presumably Acer, Asus, MSI, are already working on patches to fix this. I want to point out, this is not a software issue. This is built into the hardware. So this is going to be a firmware upgrade. If you're buying,
always fun.
If you're buying a new computer off the rack this year, you immediately have to go to the manufacturer's website and find this patch. And that's going to in some cases be easier said than done. What this problem has to do is with and I love that this is some irony here. The security hole is in Intel's trusted platform, which is their way of securing your system against outside malicious. Well, that's where the security hole is.
Yeah. So you've got your CPU on your motherboard, and there's a second little thing on there called the Intel Management Engine firmware, which is effectively a little tiny CPU.
Yes.
And it's there to keep an eye on the big CPU and keeps things from being run there.
Yep.
And it's got a bug.
Yep. Which means things that should not be run on your computer. And the best part is it can run them completely invisibly. So even your main operating system, you won't even notice. You could have a fucking Bitcoin miner installed in the background, eating your fucking process. You're like, what's going on? Why is everything going on? You won't even know it.
Yeah. Now, I checked my computer. My processor is a little too old.
Yay!
For this to have happened.
I'm happy. I have AMD. I don't have to worry about this.
You might have just they'll announce a different bug a year from now. There will be one.
Raritor points out something that's actually phenomenally hilarious too, as well. Intel's trusted, the Intel Management Engine, the trusted executable part, the operating system it's running is called Minix.
Yeah.
Which is actually a teeny tiny, very small installation of Linux that has been used in classrooms as a sort of training thing. Except Intel never told anybody they were going to use Minix, including the guy who created Minix.
And I want to say Minix is freeware, but you have to give the source code when you use it. So everyone who has one of these computers should have the source code to what's being done there.
Except it's the trusted platform, and they're doing this whole security by obscurity thing, so they don't give anyone. And the guy said that the guy who wrote.
And here's the thing: the chip it's running on is a little tiny x86.
Yep.
Which is great. It's a really old, effectively, processor. So my thought is, the Intel guys, when they said we need to have a trust platform module, what are we going to put it on? Someone said, well, we got all these old little x86 chips gathering dust.
The guy who wrote Minix actually said that he didn't mind Intel doing this, but what he would have liked to have is they had told him so he could legitimately say that Minix is the most used x86 operating system on the planet, which technically it is, because every Intel computer that's using the trusted Exchange and the Intel management engine is running Linux. So at this point, Linux is the most used operating system on planet Earth. More than Windows, more than iOS, more than Linux is the most, because even if your computer runs Windows, it's still running Linux. I love that. I fucking love that.
Yep. Kind of neat. But yeah, so far we know HP has put out fixes for it, Dell. The Ars Technica article says other vendors, but doesn't then give us a list of sites, which is a shame. Otherwise, we would say, here, go to this Ars Technica article and do it there, and find your computer there.
Now, here's the next hiccup with this. If you're building your own PC, instead of going to like a regular like Dell or HP, you have to go to the motherboard manufacturer to get a fix for this. And
they may take their time.
Yeah, considering this doesn't just affect the brand new ones, this affects the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation processors, which means those older processors from 2015, you have to depend on the motherboard manufacturer putting out a software fix for this. And we all know how motherboard manufacturers love to write new software for old hardware. That's one of their favorite things. They love doing that all the time. An old 2-year-old motherboard, hell, we love writing software for that shit. Awesome. So yeah, that's going, if you have an already put together PC and it's about 2 years old or newer, go to your manufacturer's website, Dell, HP, whatever, go there and their support section and look for the new firmware patches, any patches. Look in their support section for your model PC and see if there's a security fix for it. You might need it. If you're buying something new, the minute you get it home, be aware you're going to have to put a security fix on it.
Yeah. Now, how long we have to do this? I would suspect at least until middle of next year.
Yeah.
If you bought a computer with this processor.
Yeah.
That you're going to run into this.
So if you're using the 6000 series, the 7000 series, or the 8000 series Intel processors in your computer, and the quick way to find about this, what's the Windows key combination to bring up your system info? It's Windows key plus R. No, it's not Windows. That's run.
I use Windows E and then just right click on my computer and say.
Well, I know there's a Windows shortcut that takes Windows break. Okay, yeah, Windows and the pause break key. I'll try it right now. Windows break. That's what you need. If you look over near your number pad, there's a button there that says pause break.
That you've probably never hit before except by accident.
Yeah. Hold down the Windows key on the bottom of your keyboard next to your space bar and tap that pause break button, and it will give you your basic Windows system information. That will tell you which processor you're running so you can know if you are potentially affected by this. And if you are, please patch soon. This could end up being a nasty bug because, like we said about this, it could run things completely hidden from your main operating system.
It's going to be really interesting to see how this rolls out in, say, corporate and government environments.
Oh yeah. This was a big boo-boo. It's a huge boo-boo.
Because I'm honestly, when I go back into work on Monday, I'm going to check my computer there to see if this applies to that one there, and try to find out when they're going to roll out the patch for this at work.
They done fucked up. And I love, man, just breaking the news just before Black Friday. Ouch. That's harsh, man. Okay, well, now that we've got all of that out of the way, it's time to answer some of your tech questions. Why we're here tonight. If you have questions for Mike and myself regarding your technical stuff you've bought, or you're thinking about buying, or you've got or something your relative has been bugging you the shit out of you about like crazy because you're the only one in the family who understands how to use Facebook, we'll help. We'll do our best, man. We will, if nothing else, moral support. Send those two requests at radio.air.
So go ahead.
Send those two requests at radio.air.com.
And you might, come up with some stuff that our recommendation is find a new family.
Well, that's easy to do. That's just put out, is Craigslist still a thing? You can find one there. All right, now I actually think I may have the answer to this one, though it sounds like a bit of a bear. Our first question comes from Andy, and he writes,
"Hello, Andy.
Picked up a blue Snowball, and it refuses to get along with my system, specifically USB device not recognized. Running Windows 10 Home, 32 gigs of RAM, i7 770K processor on an Asus Strix motherboard. So there's no problem with any of your hardware. You're all good on the stats. Yeah. He's tried a different cable, several USB ports, front and back, 2 and 3, uninstalling and reinstalling devices, updating my audio and USB drivers, updating my BIOS." Wow, you have gone deep on this one, Andy. Haven't been able to try it with a different computer, but will in the next few days. Are there any other tricks you can think of that might help? Yes, and this is a little known thing about the blue Snowball. The blue Snowball, let's back up a few seconds, is one of the more popular microphones out there for people who are just getting started in podcasting or video making and whatnot. And it's a decent microphone. It's for the money, and it is relatively cheap. For the money, it's put together very, very well, and it works really nicely. So, if you just want a simple plug and go microphone, if you're just a beginner, if you don't even need like all that much heft to your microphone for your stuff, that's fine.
It's a good solid mic.
But here's a little thing that kind of escapes people. The blue Snowball has its own firmware. And this is one of those things where if you bought one, it'll say blue Snow, it'll look like every other one, but you might have bought one that's been sitting in the back of the store for a while. And it will look identical to any other blue Snowball, but it might be running an older version of the blue Snowball firmware, which means it might not be compatible and up to date with your current system. Now, there is a fix for this, and you can go to Blue's website and look for blue Snowball firmware. The only trouble is you're going to have to find an older PC, possibly Windows 7. I'm more than willing to bet a Windows 7 PC. You're going to have to find an older PC to plug the blue Snowball into and run the firmware update on there. You've got to find a computer that will recognize the blue Snowball first. Then you could run the firmware update on that computer, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, it should work with your nice i7 7700K setup. It's one of those things people just, but I've seen that the firmware on this blue Snowball caused problems before. Mac has had a lot of issues with blue Snowballs with older firmware on them. I'm presuming because you have such new hardware here, and the 7700K is really new. Windows 10 is constantly being updated. That's my guess, is you're just, even if you bought it brand new from the store, I'm willing to bet you just got one from the back that had the old firmware on it. All the packaging looks the same. Even if you get one from 5 years ago, if you get one today, they're all the same. The hardware wise, they haven't changed. It's the little computer inside the blue Snowball that hasn't been updated. So go to Blue's website, look into the support, look for Blue Snowball firmware, find a computer that will run. You can plug the Blue Snowball in and it will work, and update the firmware.
Now, there's another possibility I'm just going to toss out there. If you right-click on the little sound icon in your system tray, the little thing looks like a speaker with some speaker waves coming out of it, sound waves coming out of it, and bring up your recording devices with the Blue Snowball plugged in. See what other recording devices you have active there. It may be conflicting with something you already have. Just because Windows 10 goes, oh, well, we're going to default to this and we're not going to come off the default.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so disable everything else under recording. You can always right-click and re-enable them if you need to. Reboot the machine and then see if it recognizes the Blue Snowball. I'm seeing some places where they go, yeah, that worked. There's another program out there as well called ASO for All. I believe it's a free download. And it is a program that it does audio interfacing basically outside of the Windows tray sort of deal. And it's used with a lot of professional sound equipment. And it may also be a workaround for you. ASO for All might recognize the Blue Snowball when Windows itself goes, I don't think there's anything there. ASO for All go, yeah, it's right here. And here you have sound. And you're good to go.
Now,
two other workarounds that might, in case you can't get to a Windows 7 machine to update the firmware, or in case the firmware update doesn't work.
Now, Will Jr. in the chat is asking, what about a Windows 7 virtual machine? Could you run the firmware update through a virtual machine? Maybe?
Okay, so the problem with doing it through a virtual machine is great for a lot of things, but it's still talking to the main OS to handle passing off of peripherals.
Right.
Like, okay, so say you have a Windows 7 virtual machine set up and you want to print. It's still going to talk to the Windows 10 print queue to go out and print. And it's just passing. I have a Windows 7 print queue that is passing things to the Windows 10 print queue, which is passing things to the printer. And you generally, in your Windows virtual machines, have to set up allowances for allow this thing to talk to these things, allow the virtual machine to talk to these inputs and outputs. So it's a maybe, but I suspect it's going to go, hey, I'm going with whatever Windows 10 says is a valid USB device, not Windows 7 defaults.
And finally,
it's worth a shot. If you can if you have a Windows 7 virtual machine you can set up easily, worth a shot.
And finally, Andy, if you've tried all of those things and none of them works, I hate to say it, you might have just bought a lemon.
Yeah.
Rare, but possible.
Now, how much does the Blue Snowball cost?
$50.
Okay. It's a little bit more. I was reading one of my music magazines, and there's a new microphone, $99, and it's targeted for people who are doing podcasting type things, and it's apparently really easy setup as well. So it might be, hey, look into something else. It comes with its own little stand, like the Blue Snowball. Okay. But yeah, let us know what happens. What works. There is a Microsoft answers thread on this very topic. And there's people said, we tried this and we tried this and we tried this. And some people saying it did work and some people saying it didn't work, or it worked until I rebooted and then it was gone again. So one of the amusing things I noticed on this thread, one of the responders was Griffin Nash.
Aw, that's cute. All right, let's answer Steven's question. He says, I'm currently putting together a list of parts to rebuild my computer for early next year. I'm planning on using it for gaming, video editing, along with my schoolwork, mostly coding projects. I'm getting an 8th gen Intel processor, i5 8600K, not bad when it becomes available. Knowing about the security issue, which is why I narrowed my motherboard search to Gigabyte, started releasing updates for this issue. I've never had Gigabyte motherboards before, and I was wondering your thoughts on the Gigabyte Z370 Aorus Gaming 7 motherboard. Well, Stephen.
Gigabyte's a pretty solid company.
Yeah.
Let's start there. I've had no complaints about Gigabyte gear I've purchased in the past.
I'm actually using, let's see, my shit. I think all of my motherboards going back to 2012 and maybe further back, if it's hard to remember, all of them have been Gigabyte boards.
My current motherboard's a Gigabyte board.
I'm currently using in my system of the Aorus 7 branding, Aorus Gaming 7 branding. My system is an Aorus 7, although it's the AMD version for Threadripper, but it's still an Aorus Gaming 7. Gigabyte has been, now, I will tell you, while Gigabyte has solid hardware, understand that for support, if you have an issue with things, you are out in the woods.
Yeah, they seem to be doing a good fix on the Intel issue,
right?
But that's because they're going, shit, we've got a lot of motherboards out there. We need to provide a fix.
I had glitches, and I'm going to be generous with them because this was a brand new CPU, brand new chipset, whole new thing for AMD. I had some big glitches with this motherboard when I first got it regarding the BIOS and the backup BIOS, and I had to look up, dive deep, because Gigabyte support, when I tried to contact them about some of the issues I was having, were not very helpful. So keep that in mind. I'm not really blaming Gigabyte for it because it was kind of new. I will say that if you're looking for a little bit easier to communicate with and a little bit more responsive support company built for motherboards, Asus kind of is a bit better to talk to if you need to talk to somebody. It's all about your comfort level in building this stuff. If you're able to just dig into the guts and understand directions to fix shit yourself, Gigabyte's fine, and they are a bit cheaper. Their prices are a little bit more reasonable compared to Asus. But Asus, they also make very reliable stuff, and from my experience, their support has been better and easier with communication, easier. Because the Gigabyte site, I'm sorry, they sent me into a chat with someone in another country who did not really speak English very well in the chat. And I had to re-explain myself several times, and I still don't think they understood what I was trying to tell them. And, that's just how it is. Be prepared for that sort of stuff. MSI is another really good motherboard company, but again, prices are a thing. With MSI, you were definitely paying a premium, but you were getting a premium as well. Yeah. So it's a toss up there. If you feel comfortable with the mucking around with stuff, there's nothing wrong with Gigabyte. The hardware is rock solid.
There's two things I would check. I would ensure you have with this board. One is that I'm seeing a couple reports that it fits a little strangely into some cases. So just make sure that, case-wise, you're good. Because they put a strange plastic shield over part of this thing, and so
that's the new trend on all the motherboards. They put that that was part of my problem was the plate. But they put these shields over the ports on it used to be they were just naked and plug them right in, but now they have these nice fancy plastic and shields and
And the other thing is I'm seeing a one report of a component overheating on this thing, but no one else seems to be reporting that. So just make sure you have good cooling on this. It is a gaming board. They do tend the tendency with a gaming build is to run a little warm.
Yeah.
So make sure you have good solid cooling in there.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, Gigabyte is one of the top three names I talk about when it comes to motherboards. Asus, MSI, Gigabyte. They're the top three really. Next question. Oh, Daryl, you got a weird one. Daryl says, as a present, I'm fixing my mother's satellite TV receiver as she can't access a lot of the features like video on demand unless it's attached to the network. The thing, for some reason, different providers, doesn't seem to like the Wi-Fi network, so I've purchased an Ethernet cable that will reach from the router to the receiver. So I have two questions. Do you have any advice for running the cable in a way that will balance not having an obvious wire running across the house, make sure the cable isn't damaged since it has to cross a high traffic area? And two, what security or connection issues do I need to worry about on the network adding a DirecTV branded satellite receiver to the network?
Okay, well, the first one, you basically got two choices on where you can run the cable. You can run it along the floor, or you can run it along the ceiling. Ceiling, you don't have to worry about people tripping over it, but it's a lot harder to put up, and it's more obvious to a lot of people.
Yeah, I
you could run it midway and have people limbo under it, but I don't recommend that.
I have run. Yeah, I do it the cheap way. I go to Home Depot. I get a whole bunch of those little zip tie sticker things. These are actually really great, especially if you're renting and you can't. They don't damage the walls. Don't put anything in the wall. They're little plastic stickers you hang on the wall, and
that have either a hook or a loop or something you can run a cable through.
Right, yeah, they have a loop that you can run a zip tie through and then just attach it to the wall. And I use that for running things along the ceiling. It's not very good looking, but it gets the job done. You don't have to worry about tripping over stuff.
If you're on the floor, you're looking at floor runners.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a thin mat, usually about 2 to 4 inches wide, and usually about half an inch in height, that you put the cable in, and then you put this down on the floor. It usually has some sticky stuff that you can put on it, so it won't, because it comes coiled up. It'll come in a coil like this, and it'll recoil itself if you let it. But if you put the sticky stuff down, and then you can put a throw carpet over it or something, and it won't be terribly noticeable.
Now, this is the cheapest, easiest option, because normally with most devices, if you plug it straight into the router via an Ethernet cable, you have no trouble. You don't have to configure anything. It just there are a couple of other options, but they're iffier, and they may or may not work. The first other option that entirely depends on the age of your house and the reliability of your wiring. It's the power line option. I've heard wildly divergent opinions about these devices. It's some people swear by them, other people say they're pieces of junk.
It's dependent on something you have no control over, which is the quality of wiring in the house.
What a power line. Go ahead.
I was going to describe what it is, but what it is basically is it's an adapter you plug in 2 places in your house. Obviously one at each end of wherever you want the connection, and it runs internet connectivity through the power lines.
Yeah.
Now, where you run into problems with this is it obviously works best on power lines that are on the same circuit.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're on different circuits on your breaker box, they may not actually connect.
Right. So it's pretty much like you have 2 wires with no ends on them that aren't even connected to one another. It's just the data's going nowhere.
Yeah. So the most ideal use of this kind of thing is where you have something at one end of the room and you need to connect to something at the other end of the room, but you don't want to run a cable, or there's a reason you can't run a cable the whole way. And so you go plug, done. Because in a given room, unless it's a kitchen, you're probably on one circuit.
Now, well, the next trouble is with a power line solution is the quality of the wiring. If it's old wiring, and you should probably replace it anyway because you might burn your house down, or even just not entirely newish wiring and just whatever. It'll transmit power just fine, but trying to transmit data along those wires, it doesn't give you the quality and the speed you need. It gives you intermittent problems.
Especially if you have if the wiring changes material.
Yeah.
Along the way.
Yeah.
If it goes copper to a certain point, it hits a little box, and a splitter box, and it's aluminum from some other point, and it goes back to copper. You can run a lot of screwy things there. So I do recommend the hard cable solution, and I'd say either go hang stuff with the little hooks Nash recommended, or get the floor runners and a nice throw rug, it'll be double sticky back tape kind of stuff that comes with it that you attach the runner to the floor, which can leave a little bit of a mess if you ever have to clean it, if you ever have to pry it up and move it. But if it's hardwood floors, it cleans up pretty easily. If it's carpet, it's a little bit more of a problem. But like I say, toss a throw rug over it, you're fine. Nobody notices, and it's not a tripping hazard.
There is one last option that may kind of trick this box, and that is a wireless receiving point or a Wi-Fi repeater. A lot of these days, not only do they do Wi-Fi, but they also have an Ethernet port plugged into them. So as far as the box is concerned, it's not connecting directly to your Wi-Fi network. What's connecting to your Wi-Fi network is that repeater.
Yeah.
So as far as the box, you take an Ethernet connection, you plug it into the box, and the repeater is what actually connects to the Wi-Fi network, not the satellite box. Now,
I've tried to use this in the past, not had a lot of luck myself, but I didn't play with it for more than a couple hours before I decided, you know what? I've got long Ethernet cables here. I'm just going to use those.
Yeah, wireless bridge. Thank you. That's
wireless bridge. Yes. Now the trick with wireless bridges, I'm going to say this up front. You really need to find one that is the same brand name and ideally the same model family as your original wireless device. Otherwise, you're going to run into a lot of not the same manufacturer having talking issues.
Yeah, that is the trickiest. That is the tricky things about the wireless bridges. If you could, in fact, if you really wanted to, you can take an old Wi-Fi router and turn it into a wireless bridge. But it takes a lot of configuration. Sometimes you have to download special firmware. You have to figure out that I've done it before and it does work, but it's a pain in the ass. Now, if you get a store-bought one, like Mike says, same brand, same model family, try and keep them close to each other. You might, depends on the age of your router, you might have to find an old one to make this work. It's, again, not an ideal option, but if the problem is that box won't connect to the Wi-Fi network, I'm pretty sure you can trick it by using the wireless bridge. It'll think it's plugged into an Ethernet cable, and the Wi-Fi part will be handled entirely by that bridge, which is its own little computer. So it might be able to trick it. Now, you asked about, does it make a difference if it's a flat cable? No, it shouldn't. Flat cables are the same thing as regular Ethernet cables. They're just arranged in such a way, and I believe they're even still twisted pair. They're just manufactured in such a way that they are thinner.
The four twisted pairs are next to each other like that instead of
all bundled together. Instead of when inside your Ethernet cable, they actually twist two of the wires in pairs together. The reason you do this is because of science and physics. It cuts down on
on signal loss and disruption. It's cut down on signal interference, basically.
Which is one of those crazy things about making wires. If you twist them into like that, suddenly the signal interference is reduced and the crosstalk is reduced. Why? Electromagnetic fields and all this sort. It's nuts, but it is it's one of those workarounds. It's okay, if we twist it like this, it'll work. Okie dokie, we just twist it like this. With a flat cable, instead of having all those twisted pairs in a single, I really should not be doing this on the stream, but instead of having them all twisted together in a single line, it takes those twisted pairs and lays them out next to each other. You shouldn't have any trouble with a flat cable. Is what I'm trying to say.
And if it stays flat, it's a little bit less of a trip hazard. But again, I'd say I'd get a floor runner, and if you can't find if you don't want to, just a little bit of tape holding it down, and then still a throw carpet over it, just to keep the wear and tear on the carpet rather than the cable.
Right. Okay, let's see. Ellie Feeden has a question. Recently, I've been hearing rumors that a website and forum that I frequent might be shutting down. I spent a lot of times on the forums and like to save several of the threads. Do you know of any programs that can save lots of web pages, especially one that can handle lots of images?
Okay, so there is a difficulty with what you're asking about.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is sometimes web page owners don't like it when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
What you're asking for is a web page scraper. And if you type in web page scraper into Google, you will find several options. I've used them in the past. I have an archive of a website on an external hard drive here somewhere, and I've brought it up a handful of times when people were asking dumb questions about stuff that had been, quote, lost. And you can do it. Just make sure the web page owner is fine with it. I don't recall which one I used because that was 2 rebuilds ago. It was probably something like Web Scraper. And it's a tool that you can set up and say, here's my filter conditions, here's what I want to pull down, and you can tell it yes images. I think the more robust ones will even let you set image size limits. And then all else you need is a lot of hard drive space.
Yeah. Now how do web page moderators, how do they break those? Because you're talking about they don't like it. Do they put in tricks to break them?
They don't necessarily put in tricks to break them, but what they can see, if it's a site that goes, hey, we're spending a lot of bandwidth right now towards this one direction, they can possibly tell that it's a web page scraper going on because it's loading stuff through so quickly and following links. Because what you can do is you can say, go here, traverse every link on this page, give me the web everything back inside this domain. So obviously if they link to CNN or link to YouTube, it's not necessarily going to pull down the YouTube video. And then to a certain depth. So if one page links to another thread on that same site, it will follow that and go there. And they can go, we're seeing a lot of bandwidth going to this one IP address. We're cutting them off.
So that's one of the dangers you have to worry about.
But if you contact, if the web page administrators are okay with it, ahead of time, then you shouldn't have any difficulties. Or if you tell it, and I think some of the web scrapers can be set to limit the amount of bandwidth they use. So they only, they do it in bursts, so it looks more like a natural person doing it. Or they go, only get this much at a time, then wait half an hour, then get this much more.
And it's not entirely reliable, and I'll say that right up front. Well, no, not the web page scraper. There is another option, but it's not entirely reliable, and that is the good old Wayback Machine, which that's a 50-50. Sometimes you can find stuff on the Wayback Machine, and sometimes the Wayback Machine is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what that thing is. And sometimes you find stuff on the Wayback Machine, it goes, here you go, and the page is just all broken links, and shit doesn't work, and text is all over the damn place. It's your 50-50 bet, but the Wayback Machine can be kind of helpful in those. But like Mike said, your web scraper is your best option there. Let's go down to Baconators because he's got.
Hang on, we did need to go back slightly. Because Daryl had a second connection. Do I have any security or connection issues you need to worry about? Adding a DirecTV branded satellite receiver to the network. None that I can think of.
No, not really.
And the reason being, DirecTV is pretty good about pushing firmware patches to their system in case they find a security vulnerability. And it's completely transparent in the background. You never see it unless you happen to go right at the second that they're pushing it. It'll go updating system. Please wait, and then it'll just go. Okay, now you can watch.
All right. Baconator has one, and I think we have bad news for you. And I'm sorry, but it's probably bad news. Hey, Mike and Ash. Recently been having an issue where my USB ports on my laptop have stopped working. In other words, I'll plug in my mouse or any other device, and nothing seems to happen. Any ideas?
Okay, so if it's literally every device on there, every port on there, either one of two things has happened. Either the USB ports have died, which is possible, especially on a laptop, because they're basically in there as a little add-on card that is soldered, sometimes badly, to the main board. Or, if you are lucky, open up Control Panel, look at your device manager, and see if USB has a little arrow or a little red X by it. Excuse me, not a red arrow, a little yellow exclamation point,
Right.
or a little red X.
The caution sign. Yeah.
Which is something is conflicted or the driver's gone bad. That's if you're lucky. That's your problem.
He says, I have one working port currently. My gut is telling me that the USB controller is burned out on that motherboard.
That's what's, yeah, something. So if it's,
Well, let me ask you, Baconator, how old is your laptop? How old are we talking here? To get an idea. While he's answering that, I'll explain what's going on here. Like Mike said, on a motherboard, there is, and I don't know how integrated this is on newer motherboards, but it used to be, especially on laptop motherboards, there's a little chip that is essentially your USB.
Yeah.
And
it's got 4 little pins on it.
Yeah. And that little chip is what takes the USB ports, whatever you plug into it, and talks to the processor. In a roundabout, that's generalization there, and if something happens to that little chip, your USB just goes, fuck it. And I have had this happen on motherboards before. USB ports, some stop working, others keep working, and the reason is sometimes there are more than one of those little USB controllers, and each one has its own USB port. I've had sometimes certain USB ports just don't do shit anymore, but the other ones work just fine. That means one of those controllers has just died. They do die. I burn out. Sometimes, if you, and this is a manufacturer problem, they will plug in, they will make shoddy equipment. Either it's a shoddy USB cable or there's something bad with the device itself, and it will short out the USB controller. And once that happens, the whole thing's fucked.
Now, also, what can happen is, say, if you plugged in something that is pulling too much power off your USB,
yep,
that can short it out as well.
Yep.
You can have something that pushes too much power on the USB and short it out.
That's been a long time problem with USB. People working out of the USB spec and standard and making devices that don't conform to the standard. And
they'll say something like, well, because USB is what? It's
5 volts.
5 volts? And they'll go, well, 5.5 volts is pretty close to 5 volts.
Uh-huh. And yet even that half a volt is enough to burn out a USB controller.
Yeah,
especially
because the current on USB is next to nothing. So, if someone has a device with external power that is shoddily made, it can send some extra current down that line possibly and fry your device and fry your port. What I would invest in if I were you, Baconator, is an external USB hub, like a 4-to-1 hub. They're small, they're cheap. You can plug a mouse and a keyboard into them, or whatever other devices you need. If you need a powered USB hub because you're plugging a device that need external power, or plugging in devices that draw enough power that 5 volts isn't enough, they make those too.
He says he's not sure how old the laptop is, only a few years old. I mean, you know what? If it's only a few years old, I'm willing to bet what happened is either his USB 2.0 ports or the 3.0 ports are dead. And either he's got the 2.0 are working and the 3.0 aren't, or the 3.0 are working and the 2.0. I'm willing to bet the 2.0 have gone out.
But like I said, Baconator, check your control panel device manager just to make sure there's no conflict or bad driver issue there. Because if there's a conflict, it'll stop working.
Rareder has a great suggestion. Try to boot with a USB stick in one of those ports that's not working. And even you could try booting with Windows. You can go to Microsoft's website, get like an 8 gigabyte USB stick.
And you can get a boot image on there, yeah.
Yeah, you can make a boot version of Windows 10. Now, you're not going to install Windows 10. All we want to do with this is test and see if before your operating system even starts, if those USB ports are working. If it does, that means the problem is software. It's in Windows. And like Mike said, go to Device Manager and maybe uninstall and reinstall stuff, or you might have to reinstall Windows if it's really fuckered. But that's a way to determine if the problem is hardware or software. If it's software related.
Okay. He says the one working is on the left, the two on the right are the ones that aren't functioning. So that tells me that tells me two different USB controllers.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I would look at, Baconator, take a look at the USB port itself. Like look at the cable, look at where it plugs in. Usually they're different colored for different USB standards.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if the two that aren't working are, say, white, and the one that is working is, say, blue.
Actually, on a laptop, sometimes they don't color them, but they put a little imprint on there that says Super SS USB. It's got the USB symbol with SS on it. That stands for Super Speed USB, which is USB 3.0.
Yeah, so just see if there's an imprint or a color difference or something like that.
Yeah.
Just for our curiosity, because that'll help us, possibly. Because if it's like Nash said, the 2 point whatever has burned out and the 3.1 is good, well, that's actually better for you because the 3.1 can actually has bigger bandwidth, can handle more devices chained off of it.
Now, this is hardware and you do want to fix this, it's possible, but it's going to entail tearing your computer completely apart, finding a replacement motherboard on eBay or something, and putting your computer all back together again. And that is something that can
the reason it's a replacement motherboard is because those USB, effectively the USB chip in there is a USB header. That's what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Is not a user replaceable part.
No. Not unless you have your own industrial soldering that can handle multi-layer soldering and you know what you're doing and you have a steady hand.
I know someone who does, but
yeah. Or if you really want this fixed, and it can be pricey, you get the motherboard, you take it to a local computer shop, you ask them to swap the motherboard out for you. That might be worth it, especially if you feel the computer is worth it. But honestly, the only real sensible fix for this is it's time to get a new laptop. If you don't feel...
Say the cheap one is a USB hub to multiple devices.
That will function. That will get you by. A USB port, a USB hub into the one functioning port will get you by. But I've seen this sort of thing happen before, and my gut is saying those two USB ports are hosed. Inspiron 5555. Actually, let me look. I can probably determine just by looking at it if. And you say the ports on the left side. Let's see what he said.
He said left.
One is working on
right
the left. 5555. Let's have a look at it. I'll probably tell if I can get a good enough image of the thing.
I think this is what we used to have at work.
I just need to get...
The one on the left is a USB 3.0 port, and the two on the right are USB 2.
Yep, I was right. That's telling me that the USB 2.0 controller is shot. But like Mike says, that's actually kind of good news. USB 3.0 has more bandwidth and can deliver more power.
So, but yeah, first check, because it is entirely possible that a Windows patch or update or something screwed up the drivers for USB 2. So check your device manager, reinstall your drivers, even if it doesn't say there's a problem. It might not be reporting a problem when there is one.
Windows Update is not perfect.
Also do this. If you don't see what you think should be the USB 2 controllers there in the control panel device manager, tell it to show inactive devices. It may be something turned them off.
Yeah, that could happen too.
I had that happen to me once, and it's a case of it's not here. I can't update the driver for something that's not here. And you go, I want to say it's view, show hidden devices. Hidden devices is basically where it'll show stuff that's not on.
Yeah.
And under USB, you might see a lot of stuff. But you should see USB root hub and USB root hub USB 3.0.
Yeah, this is kind of a problem with laptops. When something goes, you're either have the wherewithal, the ability to replace the motherboard, or you're getting a new laptop. That's just
one thing I would do, because I've also had the experience when certain things start to go on a laptop, other things tend to follow them. I wouldn't automatically say your laptop's on the last legs because the USB died, but it would also be a good time to do a backup anyway, just because you'd rather back up now and then discover next week, oh, the whole damn thing died. I didn't do my backup.
One of the problems with those USB controllers, if and when they do burn out, is anytime electricity goes where it shouldn't in too much volume in any part of your system, that's already that can cause a cascade failure. That can mean there's shorts. That can mean there's damage done that can inflict other damage. That's one of those things that can take down a whole motherboard. And Gumsy's noting those ports in the teardown on that model, they are on a daughter board. Oh, it's maybe possible to replace those. Maybe, but I don't know if the controller's on the daughter board. It's just the ports on the daughter board. It's hard to say. In any event, your cheap solution right now is a USB hub. If the software fixes don't do it, your cheap deal is I'm sorry we don't have better news for you, but laptops are really hard to fix. They are. If it's not, let's see, if it's not a hard drive, if it's not the RAM, and sometimes if it's not the hard drive, the RAM, the keyboard, or the screen.
Sometimes the fans too.
Sometimes the fans too. But
depends on how accessible they make them.
Yeah, if it's not those things, it's everything else is located on the motherboard. It's all part of the motherboard, and getting at those parts is a pain in the butt. Used to be, Will Jr. says sometimes the CPU. Used to be, yes, you could replace the CPU, but starting from around 2010, every laptop I've seen since about 2010, a little after, has all had CPUs hard soldered to the motherboard, so you can't even replace those anymore.
And part of the reason they did that, by the way, is because when you have the motherboard and then a socket and and then the processor, it's a little bit more thickness that they can get rid of by putting it straight on there. And everyone said, oh, we want thinner and thinner laptops. And that is the price you pay.
And also, hey, if this is a nasty little trick they pulled, not only do you get a thinner and thinner laptop, but with the user replaceable CPUs, I have this old laptop over here I'm using as a Plex server. To give it it was using an i3 CPU, which could only do 2 threads. So to give it a little bit more oomph, I went to that same model generation. I looked up some stuff. I did a BIOS update, and I found an i7 processor for it on eBay, like $30, really cheap. And now it can do 4 threads. So I doubled the power of that for really cheap just by swapping out the CPU. It was a really simple upgrade.
Which you can't do.
Can't do that anymore.
But the companies like Dell and HP and everyone look at that as, oh no, this is so we can sell all the businesses new laptops every 5 years.
Why do people want thinner laptops? I don't know.
Because people, okay, I say this as someone who has a beast of a laptop. And it's a new beast. I bought an MSI gaming laptop. It's huge. I love it. It's a heavy fucker.
Well, thinness does not correspond to weight, though. You know, sometimes it's just a little bit more extra, just like a few grams of extra plastic to make it a little bit thicker. And that socket does not weigh that much, but
they could take a 1/16 of an inch off the total thickness and tout that as their thing. When you got people like Apple going, look how thin this thing is. Yes, it's a piece of junk too, isn't it, Apple?
Yeah, because it breaks like the Apple, their newest keyboard on the MacBook Pro with the butterfly keys, that if they fail, you have to only Apple could. They can't even. They have to send it back to the factory to fix it because they can't just fix the keyboard on it. Great, nice work, Apple. Built the keyboard into the casing so that you have to, and the casing is partly glued together so that it's not even the Genius Bar can fix it. They have to send it to the factory for a replacement.
Yeah, and they don't have a loaner that they can give you.
No, they don't. All right. Well, we've been bitching and moaning for a while now. I think that's pretty much all the questions we can get to this week. But I hope that helps some of you out there. That's what we're here for. Do we want to start trying to make this weekly? Would that be okay with you?
I think we can try, yeah.
All right, so let's try again for next Saturday. So
okay.
If you've got tech questions, go ahead and send those to requests@radiodeadair.com. We'll start doing this weekly because I think we can handle this.
I say at least through the Christmas season, and we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah, we'll see what we do from there. We'll be back next Saturday, 9 p.m. If you have any tech issues, send those to requests@radiodeadair.com.
I'm gonna call it now though. I don't know. Let's see here, hang on. Yeah, Saturday. Oh no, Saturday is the 23rd. Okay, so 2 days before Christmas. Yeah, it's possible we'll do a show. Maybe that'll be up to you.
Yeah, I'll be doing RDA on Christmas Eve or no, Christmas Day. So
okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you back here next time. Have yourselves a good evening. Enjoy your leftover turkeys and stuff if you're in America. And get your questions to us. Talk to you next time. Good night.
Yep.